I just want to ask you one thing.
What's that?
Is it for the girl?
just a dream. Do you think she could have loved me? Just a dream.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hello, friends. I hope everyone had an enjoyable week off while still being productive. And I'm excited that everyone is back. So I hope everyone is liking the new system that Miss Emily put together using the Google Slides to do all of our work. I really like that. I think that's a nice system that's a little bit easier to use. So let us know how you feel about that. So, when before the break, we started talking about World War II. We had our first lesson about World War II. So we're going to keep talking about that today. But instead of doing what we've done for the last couple of history lessons and kind of breaking down one of those videos, I thought we would kind of interrupt in the middle and do something a little bit different. We're still going to talk about World War II, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about a couple of specific events or a couple of specific things that happened during World War II that we talked a little bit about them last week that I wanted to focus a little bit more on, and I want to hear from you all as well as we're going through those. So for today, the first thing that we're going to talk about, there's some examples of it up on the screen. So the title for today's lesson, I didn't come up with a fancy title, is just "We want you to learn about World War II." So on this slide here, I've got 4 different examples of something that we talked a little bit about 2 weeks ago. Does anyone remember what this is called? There's 4 examples. One of them's kind of silly. I just found that online and thought it was funny. Sam's right. That is, this guy in the middle here is Uncle Sam. We'll talk about him a little bit. Yes, Jack, that is correct. It is all examples of propaganda. Correct, Octane, as well. Thank you. So these are examples of propaganda. The one here in the middle, let me turn on my little pointer. Aha! This guy here is Uncle Sam. He was an incredibly important kind of character, I guess, during World War II that was on all of these posters. And this is the one that was the most popular one, was just him with "We want you" written under it. And it was same thing would be used to encourage people to do everything from buy war bonds to sign up for the draft to save materials. Kai, if you have a question, you can go ahead. So he was a very important character, and I've heard a couple of different myths about where like Uncle Sam came from, and I don't actually know what's the true version of that. Let me see. I can actually look it up real quick. Yeah, so the first thing I see when I look it up is the origin of Uncle Sam as a legend. But what I heard, this is the one that I heard, and if someone wants to follow this up, they can look at it. Elon, you can ask your question as well. Is that soldiers in the United States military, when they got boxes of supplies, the box would have a capital U and a capital S stamped on the box. And I've heard that everyone assumes that that stood for United States, but I think it actually stood for something else, like a supply company. It was like United Supply or something, or Universal Supply. Go ahead, Christopher, if you have a question. And everyone saw that on the box, and everyone was like, "Oh, it means United States or whatever." It's like, "Oh no, this is like a gift. We're getting a gift from Uncle Sam." And they were like, so the U.S. on the box stood for Uncle Sam, so he became kind of a made up kind of legendary character there. So Kaya said I already answered her question. Elon and Christopher, you guys can ask your questions. But that's what we're going to start out talking about today. Are some examples of propaganda. So what we're really going to talk about is how powerful propaganda is. Yeah, Octane, we'll talk a little bit about what bonds are here in a little bit. So the power of propaganda. First, we've got to talk about what does propaganda mean. So propaganda is a noun, and it is information, sometimes of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Christopher, you'll have to find. I don't probably have time for that. Someone else can figure that out. So propaganda is stuff that you put out to convince people of your point of view. Sometimes it says sometimes it is of a biased or misleading nature. A bias, B-I-A-S, this would be a really good vocabulary word to write down. A bias means that you have a strong opinion. You feel very strongly about one way. So for example, if me and one other student were having a discussion about what's the best flavor of ice cream, and I make a really, really, really good vanilla ice cream. So I'm going to be biased. I'm biased towards vanilla. So anytime I go into that discussion, I already have my opinion kind of set aside about how I feel about that already. And it can sometimes be misleading. Sometimes propaganda is not true. Now, that's not to say that all propaganda is biased or misleading. That's why I said sometimes. But sometimes you'll maybe put things in a piece of propaganda that aren't necessarily always 100% true. So propaganda was a pretty powerful thing that got used a lot during World War II. It had been used a lot during World War I as well, but it was an even bigger deal in World War II. So I got some different examples of it. This, outside of Uncle Sam, is probably one of the most famous examples of propaganda that came out of World War II. Okay, there we go. This is another character. This character's name is Rosie the Riveter. Riveting was a type of like metalworking. It was a type of metal that they would use to build tanks and ships and things like that. So this character's name was Rosie the Riveter, and the whole point of this was it encouraged women to join the workforce. There were so many men in the United States that were off fighting during the war. They were off as soldiers. And these were all men that had been working in like factories before. And remember, also during this time, we need a lot more factories to open up to produce, guns and ammunition and tanks and airplanes and all those materials that we needed for war. So the factories were kind of empty. They couldn't produce enough stuff. Exactly, Kaya. That is awesome for her. Before this point, it would have been incredibly rare in America to see a woman working in like a factory job. But then they started saying like, hey, we don't have enough people to work in these factories. Well, let's encourage women to come work in the factories. And women would do it like they were super excited, one, to, get a responsible part in helping out with the war effort. Because like I said before this, women generally weren't allowed to have those types of jobs. So if it weren't for women going to work in those factories and kind of following this example, we might not have done so well in that war. So this is another really famous character, Rosie the Riveter, that played a big role in allowing women to join the workforce with everyone else, which is awesome. Here's a set of 4 different ones. One thing that gets left out of a lot of history lessons and a lot of books is ways that like your everyday average person helped during the war effort. This is especially important right now. Think about the situation that we're in right now with the whole coronavirus. Can you think of different things that you or your family have done to help everybody as a whole? So, obviously we don't want anyone to get sick. So are there things that you or your family have done, things that you've changed or different stuff you've started doing to help keep everybody safe? Jack said in total, the factories produced approximately 44 billion bullets throughout the war. That is correct. Yeah, so Marita and Eshbal both just said they're staying home. By doing that, you're helping prevent this virus from spreading. That's an awesome point. So during World War II, they would put out these different forms of propaganda to encourage people to do stuff to help with the war effort. So this first one here, this says, make, do, and mend, says Mrs. So-and-so. This is another kind of character they made. If you look what she's doing, she's sewing some fabric together. So if you think about right now, if you had a piece of clothing and something went wrong with that piece of clothing, something broke, you would want to fix that. Or, right now we would probably just buy a new piece of clothes. Sorry, I'm getting a bunch of messages from people about they can't get into the lesson. I'll try to figure that out. So nowadays we would just buy new materials. Back during this time frame, because things like fabric were needed to make uniforms, they encouraged people to fix stuff. So that's what she's doing there. So if you had a piece of clothing that got a hole in it, instead of going out and buying brand new clothes, just fix the clothes you already have, because they really needed that extra fabric to make things for the war effort. So here's another one here. You see there's a kind of ghost version of Adolf Hitler there saying something to her. What does that say? He's saying, take them back. And this woman is sitting there looking kind of worried. And then the post says, don't do it, mother. Leave the children where they are. What this is saying is this woman, one of her children, is off fighting in the war. And it's saying, she's obviously worried about her child and she wants to bring her child home. But they're saying, don't do that. If everyone makes their children come home from fighting the war, then, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party could win. So it was encouraging people to support any family members they had that were in the military. Another one down here that I think is kind of funny. This says, we want your kitchen waste. So think about, when you all cook dinner and whatnot, how much extra leftover food you have. A little bit of extra food that was on your plate, or if you were, making potatoes and you were peeling potatoes or something like that. All of that extra kind of food waste that normally you would just throw away. Yeah, Sound of Music is during this time frame, Kaya. All of that extra food that you would normally just throw away, they wanted you to donate that, and they would use it for animal feed. Because again, a lot of the things like corn and whatnot that were usually used to feed animals were now being used to feed soldiers. So they didn't want anybody to waste any food. Another one here that I really like, is like a horse that's kind of also a shoe. And it says, walk short distances and leave room for those who have longer journeys. So instead of using, driving around on your car or taking the bus, all of which, you use gasoline, they said, you just need to walk somewhere. Even if it's like, a 30 or 40 minute walk to go to the store, walk there instead of driving, because they needed so much gas to help support, the war effort for tanks and airplanes and ships. So a lot of the propaganda was aimed at your everyday average citizen, encouraging them to find ways to help out with the war effort. There's another one here that features a guy that we talked about before, Uncle Sam, who he's taken his hat and his jacket off, looks like he's ready to go fight. It says, enlist now in the United States Army. So this is encouraging people to enlist in the military. Kai, I don't know. None of that's happening on my end. That's something on your end, I think. For Uncle Sam, this is encouraging people to enlist in the United States Army. Enlistment means to join the army. So it was encouraging people to go and sign up for the army and, join the army to become a part of the United States military. So they encourage people to do that as well, which is kind of cool. So all of these were different ways to encourage, your average everyday person to go out and make an effort. This is another really good one. It says, when you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Join a car sharing club today. Again, we don't want to waste gas. And this one person riding by himself in the car, if everybody, 4 people were each riding in their own car, that uses 4 times as much gas as if they shared a car. So they're saying, if you are wasting gas, you're hurting the American war effort, which means that you're helping Adolf Hitler. So this was to encourage people to conserve gas. And then rationing is something that we'll talk about a little bit as well. Rationing is the idea that everybody needed to make their best effort to not use too much stuff. If you waste a lot of extra material, you take more than you actually need. That's less that's available for other people and less that's available for, the war effort. So we'll talk a little bit about rationing at the end, because I think there's some cool follow-up work that people could do with that. Okay, so we saw some of these last week. We looked at a couple of comic strips that had to do with propaganda. So I went around and found a couple of cartoons that have to do with propaganda. Hopefully, I hope you all aren't that young. I hope that you still recognize these. I hope that you recognize these characters, and everyone knows Looney Tunes, I hope. So I want us to watch this one, and this is an example of how they would use cartoons and like familiar, popular characters to support propaganda. And I want you to think about, as you're watching this, who was this video directed towards? Who did they want to watch this video, and what did they want them to think? So I'm going to go ahead and start this one up.
We're in to win, so let's begin to do the job with junk. We're in to win, turn in your tin and listen to it plunk. To our nation's call, every rubber ball goes to conquer freedom's foe. Freedom's foe? Freedom's a foe. Oh, freedom's foe. We're in to win, our scrap is in. So to victory, let's go. And do the job with junk. Puss, pants, gas, old tin cans, pails, nails, empty gales, fats, hats, rubber mats, missing links, kitchen sinks, garbage cans, electric fans, rubber boots, bathing suits, reels, wheels, run-down heels, beds, springs, piston rings, metal shears, old tin ears, tires, chains, water mains, skates, plates, furnace grates, pitching forks, rubber corks, sacks, racks, railroad tracks, clothes, hose, fiddle bows, plugs, lugs, bathroom rugs, cotter keys, housemaid knees, rubber bands, birdcage stands, metal snips, pillow slips, locks, socks, grandpa clocks. And that's why we're in to win. Well, how do you like that, sickle groover?
Destroy that scrap pile! 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 Destroy! 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 That scrap pile!
Classic Looney Tunes. Okay, let's see. Marita, you can go ahead and ask your question. So this was a couple people already asked what are Looney Tunes. That's you'll need to watch more cartoons. Looney Tunes is the same group of cartoons that like Bugs Bunny is a part of. So this was a cartoon that was put out on TV during World War II. Obviously, cartoons are directed towards children. But what was the goal of this cartoon? What did they want? You know, what point were they trying to get across? There were a couple of different things that this cartoon did. So I'm curious, how did you all take that? What did you see? What changes do you think were they expecting? Or how did they want people to receive this? So Sam, that was a really good point. They said for people not to waste stuff. So at one point, Daffy Duck there had that kind of weird song where he was going through all the different supplies that they needed. One part of it was to tell people not to waste stuff, but more importantly, what they were saying is, if anybody had any of that stuff laying around, they wanted them to bring it to a scrap yard. So a scrap yard was a place, it's almost like a recycling center. So a lot of the stuff that he was pointing out there was stuff that was made out of metal. Yes, exactly. Octane said to donate tin, iron, and lead. Any kind of metal they needed to support the war effort, to make, weapons and tanks and things like that. Good. Glad, Marita. So they wanted people to donate any old junk they had that could potentially be turned into something for the war effort. So that was the first part, was encouraging them to support the war effort by donating scrap or scrap metal. The next part after that, it showed a kind of cartoonish, almost funny version of Adolf Hitler. And then it showed a bunch of the Nazi troops as well. And, they were all really kind of bumbling, goofy. They kept, falling over and knocking in each other, and they were silly. So it was meant to kind of make the enemy look, weak and weird. So they wanted them, to show like, oh, look at how silly these other people are. Yeah, that also made them look evil. But it made them look like, they weren't smart, and, oh, you don't need to worry about them. So the whole point of this cartoon was to kind of make kids realize, hey, you can support this effort by donating scrap, but also, like, look at how weird and silly and odd, this enemy is. They weren't really trying to scare anybody with it. Clumsy is a really good word for it, Kai, absolutely. Awesome. So that was a cool Looney Tunes cartoon I found. And again, there are hundreds of these. You can find a lot of them on YouTube. So a lot of the propaganda we looked at before, it was stuff that was meant to kind of encourage people to help out with the war effort, or it was, here's how you can do your part. Another type of propaganda is what's called fear-based propaganda. So with fear-based propaganda, you're trying, not trying, trying's not the word, but the goal of this is to kind of have people realize how serious the situation is, and maybe use a little bit of fear of the enemy. Yeah, so Kai said those pictures are kind of creepy. They absolutely are. The whole point of this was to convince people like, hey, you need to take this seriously. If we don't win this war, this could be very bad for us. So, here they've got, Adolf Hitler, and then kind of a caricature, which is kind of like a picture or portrait of a Japanese leader, and they're looking right over America, so there's a threat to us. If we don't win this war, our homes are in danger, so we need to support the military. This one here, is showing an American house that's been damaged by some kind of attacks. It's like, if we don't stop the war in Europe, the war could come here to America. So the picture kind of creepy. Sam, that's exactly the point. Yeah, this one, he's watching you. Is, like, if you don't do your part, this is a German soldier's helmet kind of looked like this. They're like, if you don't do your part in the war, the enemy soldier is watching what you're doing, and if they look and see that we're kind of weak as a country and not helping out, it could really damage us. Same thing down here, a couple different ones. The one down here on the bottom left is he your child? You don't want this. It's saying, if we lose the war, our children are going to be taken over by the Nazis. They're going to become Nazis. Then stuff down here is about not wasting stuff. This is someone that works in a factory. It says, the wasting fool, every day he breaks a tool. So if you have an important tool you're using to build something, you need to take care of it. Because, if you break a hammer, we have to now use more materials to make you a new hammer. Same thing down here. Does anyone recognize the artist from this one? Hopefully someone recognizes this one. Christopher said, didn't Germany have like spikes come out of their helmet? Yeah, that was a World War I thing. Yeah, Christopher, that's right. This is a Dr. Seuss comic again. It looks kind of like the Grinch almost. So this says, starve the squander bug. Why buy war bonds? Squander means waste. So it's like, if you have extra money sitting around, don't waste it and spend it on, ridiculous stuff. Buy war bonds, which is basically like investing in the government. You would take some of your money and give it to the government for the war effort, and then after the war's over, they would pay you back. Hello, Maddie. Oh, I'm glad you got in. Yes, go ahead and ask your question. Another one down here says the same thing. It says, this man is your friend. He fights for freedom. So this is a Russian soldier. So where we're about to get in our World War II lesson is when Russia joins the Allies. So this is encouraging people to like, hey, you need to support Russian people. Is fake news propaganda? Ooh, Maddie, that's such a good question. So propaganda still absolutely gets used today in political stuff. It gets used in normal, commercials. If you think about when you see a commercial for, breakfast cereal, every breakfast cereal claims to be, oh, I'm the best. We're the best breakfast cereal. That's propaganda. But yes, someone saying something is fake news is propaganda because they're encouraging you to ignore someone else's opinion about something. It's a really good point. And then last one down here, again, kind of a scary, creepy one. This symbol here is a swastika. It was the symbol that the Nazi Party used. And it's showing that kind of shadow over top of some American children. And it says, don't let that shadow touch them. Buy war bonds. So by supporting the government, supporting the United States military, by donating money and buying war bonds, you're directly protecting your kids. So this is an example of some propaganda that was used to kind of scare people a little bit, maybe, into doing stuff. So you can see there's different types of propaganda. All right. Speaking of, Marita asked if the shadow has a meaning. Yeah, we said the shadow here is the symbol that all the Nazis have on their uniforms. Like if you look here, this picture of Adolf Hitler, the symbol is called a swastika. It was originally a Buddhist symbol that means peace, but it was turned the other way. And then the Nazi Party basically stole that symbol and turned it into a pretty evil thing. Christopher, go ahead if you've got a question, buddy. Stay on this slide for another second or two. But again, there are hundreds of thousands of different examples of propaganda that was used during World War II. And you can also see propaganda that was used during the Korean War, the Vietnam War, or the Cold War that we're going to talk about here in a few weeks. So propaganda is a really important tool that's used during wartime. Christopher says, why is the Nazi salute like it was? Don't 100% quote me on this. This is what I seem to remember, but this would be a really good thing for someone to research and look into. It was recreating a Roman military salute, like an ancient Roman military salute, because that's what a lot of the Nazi Party's ideas were based on, were the ideas that they were better than everyone else and they needed to conquer the world, which is something that the Imperial Rome did. And so that salute, that kind of arm out in front of you, is an ancient Roman kind of Imperial Rome salute. But that's what I remember learning. But I don't know. There might be another thing. That'd be a fun thing for someone to look up. But before we do that, we looked at a cartoon earlier that was kind of a little bit more silly and goofy. This is a different cartoon that you all might recognize the creator of at the end. that has a completely different purpose. So let's watch this one. And as we're going through, I want you to think about, imagine if you were a child or even an adult during World War II. How would watching this make you feel? Okay, so I absolutely agree with you all. That is scary. That is correct, Elon. That is meant to be scary, right? No one's meant to watch that and laugh. Yeah, so Krister, it makes you feel worried and scared. That's exactly what they wanted people to think. Marita, you can go and ask your question. This was very different from the one that we watched at the beginning, the Looney Tunes cartoon. This was meant to show you, and that the whole cartoon of this is actually a lot longer. It's about 5 or 6 minutes, I think, total. It kind of shows, it's meant to make people realize, here's how evil these people are, and here's the horrible things they want to do, and here's how, the soldiers aren't even people, they're basically robots. So this was meant to kind of, scare people. There's not really a better word for it. Someone pointed out here at the end, this says a Walt Disney production. So that means Disney, the same people that made, all of the Disney cartoons, created this cartoon. So Disney was making these propaganda cartoons as well. So pretty interesting to look at. But compare those two cartoons to one another, and man, there's a huge difference between the two of them, right? Veronica said frightened, exactly. So this one had, really kind of ominous, scary music, and it had a lot of fire. So Marita said that it showed a lot of things that people cared about going away. It showed churches going away, and it showed books getting burned, and the Bible going away. So it was like, it was telling people in America, hey, the Nazis in Germany, they want to take all of these things away from you, and you should be scared or worried about that. Exactly. Maddie said it also made me feel confused and like everything is gone, but it's kind of smart to get people to prepare. Yeah. So this was showing, here's the worst case scenario. If we don't do anything, it's going to get pretty bad. Awesome. I'm glad that you all are able to see all that. Now, America was not the only country to produce propaganda. Of course, the other ally countries did. England had some really amazing propaganda. But, Germany and Japan and the other Axis powers produced a lot of it as well. So up here at the top, there's a lot of different German propaganda that goes everything from supporting the motherland to, just a big picture of Adolf Hitler. This one here is Germans blaming a lot of their problems on Jewish people, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. So it was encouraging them to, hate other people. This one here was encouraging everybody to stand up and, support the economy and work really hard. Yes, it's incredibly rude. Now, people would do the same thing in America. It's something I want us to always keep in mind. How do you think, I'm curious, what do you think if back in America during World War II, how do you think your average American person treated someone that was German or Japanese or Italian? How do you think those different people got treated? People that were living here in America, people that were American citizens but maybe had German names or German families or German accents. How do you think those people got treated? Exactly. That video that we just watched, the kind of scarier one, it made people think that all German people were bad, and it would make them think that all Japanese people were bad. The same way that the Nazi Party would say that anyone that isn't German is bad. So the same thing happened in America to a certain degree. There were people that were treated very poorly just because of where they were from. Yes, Ayla, my last name is German. And for example, Indiana, back during World War II, had an amazing, had a lot of German people living in Indiana. A lot of people that had come over to America, well before this were living there. My family lived in Indiana since the Civil War. My German ancestors came over to America around the time of the Civil War, the American Civil War. And so they were living here. And there were stories about people that, like, German-owned businesses that were being destroyed, or, German people that were being threatened. So the same thing happened here. When we put out propaganda that encourages people to hate or be afraid of Germany, they're afraid of German people living in Germany, but they're also going to be afraid of people that are living here in America. So same thing down here. There's some Japanese propaganda in these two that have different pictures of different types of soldiers. This one here that says, "We the Japanese forces pay its deepest homage to those who died or were wounded on the battlefield." So it's basically blaming American leaders and American soldiers for people that died in Japan. This down here, this is Adolf Hitler, and this is a big movie camera. A big thing that they would do in Germany during this time, and we did it in America as well, is make movies that were very patriotic. So they would make these German movies that showed, German soldiers winning different fights, or were about, great famous German people, or did things to make people afraid of America. Maddie said, what? Just like COVID-19 happening right now, people do insane things when they're scared. Absolutely, Maddie. This lesson couldn't have come at a better time. People do some pretty crazy stuff when they're scared. Luckily right now, most of what people are doing is hoarding toilet paper. But, imagine if this gets worse and worse and worse, people will, I don't think it's going to. I should have said that at the start. But yeah, people act kind of strange when they're scared, and propaganda takes advantage of that. You use propaganda to make people more scared or more concerned. Elon, did Germany ever win any war? We'll talk about that later. That's a whole different situation. But yeah, Germany's been around for a long, long time. So historically, yes, they were involved in some wars, but World War I and World War II, definitely not. Okay, moving on. So for this, this would be some fun follow-up work. We'll talk about this at the end. There's a lot of very interesting propaganda you all could look at. We really only looked at American and German propaganda. There's a lot of really cool British propaganda, because you think about, for like Britain, Britain was getting bombed during World War II. So the type of propaganda they would put out would be very different, because they were directly under attack. So that is definitely something to think about. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about today, this will be the last part of the lesson, is nationalism and something called the Holocaust. So for those of you that are sixth years in our class, a few years ago, we had Elon's father came to our class and talked to everybody about the Holocaust. So I'm hoping a couple of you can maybe chime in with something that you learned from that. But I wanted to talk about this because this is a very important part of of World War II. Go ahead, Marita, if you have a question. Oh yeah, Elon, you were there. I remember I came in right at the end of it that day. So we talked before about with the Nazi Party and their political system of National Socialism, supported a couple of things. One of them was radical nationalism, and radical means like extreme, and nationalism means like support or love or following of whatever your country says to happen. Maddie says she worked on the Blitz and the London bombing. Awesome. So part of radical nationalism is if you practice radical nationalism, you say that your country is better than everybody else in the world, and the people that live in your country are better than other people, and anyone that is from another place is basically worse than you, which is an example of extreme racism. The idea that someone is better or worse simply because of the type of person they are, or their ethnicity, or where they're from, which obviously is not true. So one of the big ways that these ideas of radical nationalism and being racist would come out were how Germany would handle people that they saw as weak. So Hitler and the Nazi Party looked to place blame for Germany's weakness on groups of people they felt inferior, people that they thought were not as good as them. The big groups that they were focused on here were Jewish people, disabled people, a group called Romani, which were an ethnic and religious group in Europe, basically anyone that was not European, and anyone that wasn't pure German. So obviously they, fought alongside the Japanese. The Japanese were on their side, but they did not think that the Japanese were as good as them. They were just a useful ally. Anybody that did not, anyone that fit any of these categories was seen as a weak person. And remember, we talked about in our lesson last week, a big part of the reason that Germany started this war was because of the blame game they were playing. They wanted someone to blame their situation on. They wanted to blame someone for losing World War I. They wanted to blame someone for their economy being bad. And they wanted to blame somebody for, all of the punishments they received out of the Treaty of Versailles. And they would blame these people. They would say it was these people's fault that they got treated the way they did. So, another picture of Adolf Hitler here. The Nazis believed that by getting rid of inferior people, Germany would become powerful again and would eventually control the world. So remember, they used all of this propaganda to convince people that we lost World War I and we're in such a bad situation because of these people. And the only way we can fix that problem is to get rid of these people. And they convinced everybody of that using propaganda. And like you all said earlier, just a few minutes ago, people in Germany were scared. So they were willing to believe this. They thought, okay, they said we can fix this situation if we just listen. So people were willing to listen to this, even though it was crazy. And you would think no smart person would believe any of this, but they absolutely did. So early on, a lot of people that were in these groups tried to escape Germany or escape Nazi-controlled places like Poland and France. Because remember where we were in our lesson, Germany had pretty much taken Poland and France over. So anyone there that was in one of these groups was going to try to escape from there. Eventually, the Nazis would begin to arrest anyone they felt wasn't a true German and then send them to places called concentration camps. Yes, Christopher, concentration camps were horrible. So any of these people were not, it was not safe for them to be in Europe. And the Nazis, German soldiers and Nazis would go out, try to find those people and send them to these concentration camps. So that's I guess the next thing that we're going to talk about is what that led to is something called the Holocaust. So the Nazi ideas of superiority led them to decide that anyone or any groups they felt were inferior should be wiped out. So there were concentration camps, some of the most famous names are places like Auschwitz and Dachau and Buchenwald. But there were almost 1,200 concentration camps that were established throughout Europe during World War II. Prisoners in these camps were forced to work. A lot of them were set up like factories where they were treated incredibly poorly. They weren't given enough food or water or medicine. They were beaten, and sometimes they were killed just for their beliefs. These specific camps, Auschwitz, Dachau, and Buchenwald, there wasn't any work to do there. People that got sent to those camps were just killed at the camp. So it was it was horrible. It was absolutely one of the most horrible things that's ever happened in the history of the world. This place existed specifically to kill people. That was the only job of that place. It's absolutely terrible. So the results coming out of that. Before the Holocaust, there were about 9.5 million Jewish people in Europe. In all of Europe, there are about 9.5 million Jewish people. An estimated 6 million Jewish people were killed during the war. That is insane. 9.5 million people and 6 million people were killed. It's hard to even understand that. So entire families got destroyed during that time. Kaya, the slides will be up on the stream. We don't need to go back. Entire families got destroyed. So many people were killed that many family names have been completely erased. So this is the one that I think is just crazy. If you think about how many people have the same last name, they had to kill enough people that no one was left alive with that same last name. Again, this is very sad and upsetting to talk about, but it's an important thing to realize because this is how dangerous the ideas that the Nazis had during this war were. The ideas they had were so dangerous that they led to 6 million people being killed, almost everybody that followed this one particular religion. So this is why those ideas that we've talked about the last couple of weeks are so dangerous, because using those ideas and using propaganda, they convinced pretty much everybody in Germany, like, hey, we have to do this. And instead of doing the smart or kind or logical thing and saying like, hey, no, we shouldn't do that, that's bad, people started to think like, okay, yes, we'll do this because it's what's important. Marita, go ahead if you have a question. In addition to that, nearly 1 million disabled, Romani, and homosexual people were killed as well. Again, any group that was seen as not right, or any group that the Nazi Party felt like was hurting them or hurting their government, they tried to get rid of. Yeah, so entire generations of people existed. It's really sad to think about, but it's an important thing to remember, because if you ignore that things like this happened, it makes it more likely that something like this could happen again. So this is a really important thing to go over. And I know, like, I wish I could have been there more, or I wish we were still in school now, because I would have loved to have had Elon, had your dad come back in to talk to us, because he has a much better perspective on this than I do. But it's really important that we understand a lot about not just what happened, but why it happened. So the most important thing that we've talked about the last couple of weeks is what was going on in Germany and the ideas involved with the Nazi Party and nationalism led to something like this happening. So the Holocaust showed how truly evil the Nazi ideas about nationalism were. Any political system that supports genocide has no place in our global community. Christopher, go ahead. And Marita, I'm still waiting on yours as well. This is another new vocabulary word. Genocide is the deliberate killing of a large group of people, especially those of a particular ethnic group or nation. So when we talk about the Holocaust was a genocide that was brought or propagated or started against particularly Jewish people. But remember, there were a lot of different groups that were targeted there. Marita, that's a really good question, and that actually ties straight into this. Those camps are still there. They're again, they were all over Europe, and most of them are still open, are still open to the public to go visit. Like this right here is Auschwitz, and now Auschwitz serves as a Holocaust memorial. People can go there to learn about what was happening. It's a very sad place, but again, the whole point is if they went in and just completely destroyed this place, just got rid of it, destroyed it, and planted trees there, and it's just gone, then it's harder for us to remember what happened. And again, we don't want to, as horrible as it was, we don't want to forget about it happening. So by setting these places up as memorials, we can remember. Elon said, "My dad went there with my grandma." That's awesome. Like I really wish that we could talk to your dad and hear about everything that he knows about this, because I know you all know a lot more about this. But yes, Marita, these places, not all of them, but quite a few of them are still open, kind of like museums almost, as a way to help people remember what happened so it doesn't happen again, and also to pay respect to the people that lost their lives there. So that is a very good question. So this is obviously very obviously, it's a very sad thing that happened. Maddie said, is that illegal for them to still operate? Oh, so no, they're not operating, Maddie. They're not still open as concentration camps. They're open as museums. So people go and visit this place and they learn about what happened there, and they learn about, how horrible it was. And then like here, you can see people leave letters to like family members that they've lost, or they can leave letters of support or kind of remembrance. So they're open like museums. They're not still open and functioning. I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. That was entirely my fault. If anyone has questions, you can type them in. Yeah, sorry, Maddie, that's my fault. I misspoke. Elon said the little wood blocks have names on them in Hebrew for a lot of the people that died there. See, those are wood blocks. Okay, I thought they were cards. I see they're little tiles of wood, and if you look, they go all the way along there. That's so cool. I didn't know that. And you said they have people's names on them. That's amazing. Yeah, anyone that's got questions, go ahead. We'll have a few more minutes for questions here. Then we've got one more quick video to watch. Then we'll talk about our follow-up work. Yeah, I know we have a lot of students in our class that have some Jewish heritage, which is, again, I really wish we were in school, because I would have loved to have had some different parents or grandparents come in to talk to us about this. Oh, so Kai asked about so they're not paper, they're little blocks of wood that have people's names on them. So yeah, there's still a couple of these that are kept open, again, like museums, so we don't forget about what's happened. That's awesome. I love Elon. Thank you for your input. Like I said, I know that you all you know a lot more about this than I do, so I appreciate your input on this. Okay, I didn't want to end this on a super sad note. Octane, if you have a question, go ahead. So Marita, they said people can go here and write names of like family members or friends or someone that they know of that died in one of these camps as a way to kind of remember them. Same thing that people do here. If you go visit someone's gravestone in a graveyard, you can leave flowers or a message there. But for the people that died in these camps, they weren't given a gravestone. They were just they didn't have that. So this is the best way to kind of leave a message or leave something to kind of remember that person. And anyone's got questions, go ahead and ask. I'll do another minute for questions. And then we'll go into the last part. Like I said, I didn't want to end this on a super sad note, so there's a video right after this that we'll watch. There were a lot of people in Europe that were working very, very hard during World War II to try to save people from ending up in places like this. So we're going to watch a video about a pretty amazing person that helped a lot of people during this time. So we'll go ahead and get that started. Anyone else that has questions, go ahead and type them in, and then we'll look at it. So this is a question that a video that kind of talks about one of these pretty amazing heroes.
He was always the most reluctant of heroes, but there were many more beyond this room who owed their life to Nicholas Winton. On a trip to Prague just before the outbreak of the Second World War, the young stockbroker saw the growing refugee crisis. He arranged 8 trains from Prague to London, delivering almost 700 mainly Jewish children to the safety of foster families.
It was not something I felt I had to do. It was something I wanted to do.
He never spoke about it for 50 years until his wife discovered documents about the rescue mission in their loft. But even when he broke his silence publicly, it was regret for the children he didn't manage to save that he most wanted to talk about.
250 children in the train, ready to leave in Prague. War broke out and they were sitting ducks then for Hitler. They all were killed.
This is his scrapbook. There are all kinds of fascinating pictures in it. Perhaps you can see, this is a picture of Nicholas Winton himself with one of the children he rescued. If you look at the very back of this scrapbook, fascinating things in it, all the letters. But back here is the list of all the children. This is Vera Diamant, now Vera Gissing. We did find her name on his list. Vera Gissing is with us here tonight. Hello, Vera. And I should tell you that you are actually sitting next to Nicholas Winton.
Thank you. I wore this around my neck, and this is the actual pass that we were given to come to England. And I'm another of the children that you saved.
Can I ask, is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton? If so, could you stand up, please?
Okay, so like I said, I didn't want to end that last bit talking about it. Yeah, I know, Sam. It's sad, but in kind of a happy way. That guy is awesome. So this guy here, Nicholas Winton, he was British. He was from England, and he was in Prague, in a different part of Europe, just before World War II started out, and saw that there were all of these children that had nowhere to go. They were basically running away from Germany and the Nazi Party, and he was like, and he said in there, he's like, it wasn't something that I had to do, it was something I wanted to do. So he used his own money and his own time to basically get a bunch of trains to take all of these kids back to England, where there were families waiting to help take care of them. So it said he saved, at least 750 kids. So this guy is absolutely an amazing hero that saved all these people. And what I really like about that video, the clip that we saw, all of the people that were in the audience there were the children that he had saved. They were grown-ups now. So people that he had literally saved their life, and they came back, to say thank you. And if you think about, he saved 750 people, and all of those people have had children or grandchildren. He's saved thousands of people because of what he did. So he's a pretty amazing person. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2015. He was 107, I think. Or no, wait, I'm bad at math. Yeah, I was right, 107. But he is a pretty amazing person. And again, luckily, there were quite a few people in Europe during this time that did some pretty amazing things to save people from that situation. So, yeah, so Marita said, that's very cool how you can sit next to someone who saved your life. Yeah, that was a pretty amazing thing, because a lot, all of those people that he had saved, they hadn't seen him since, World War II. So this was like their first chance to get to see him and, thank him basically for helping. So anyone with questions, you can type your questions in while I'm talking about the follow-up work. So your follow-up work is going to be due next week. Same thing that we've been doing so far, because I really like a lot of the work I've been getting so far. Anne Frank was a Montessori student. I had no idea. That is so cool. That would be an awesome thing for people to research. So for your follow-up work due next week, I want you to continue to explore something that interests you about World War II. Anything you want to learn more about, you are more than welcome to learn about. The important thing is that I want you to find a way to let me know what you're learning about. You don't have to write a research paper, but I want you to be able to show me what you've been learning. A lot of you have been talking about how you've been drawing stuff with chalk. If you find a way to express what you've learned in chalk, that's amazing. Go for that. However you want to do it is fine, but I want you all to really be creative and explore what interests you. So some ideas I had, the things you could talk about. You can talk about art and culture, medicine during this time, the way that like doctors and hospitals worked during World War II, things like the military draft, people being forced to join the military in Europe and America, rationing, which we talked about. If anyone here has grandparents or great-grandparents that were around during World War II, talk to them about rationing. I used to love talking to my grandmother about rationing, because she was saying every month you would just get this book of cards, almost like coupons or stamps, that showed you how much stuff you could buy. So for example, they would get a card every month that was for 2 pounds of butter, and you would go to the store and you would hand over that card, and then you would buy 2 pounds of butter. You still had to pay for it, but if you ran out of butter, you couldn't go to the store and buy more because you already used your ration card. So ration cards were sent out and everyone was limited in how much stuff they could buy. Rationing, I think, is a really, really, really awesome, interesting part of this. There was another thing called freedom gardens. The government encouraged everybody to grow their own garden, to grow their own food. Yes, Christopher, you can absolutely research concentration camps. Sam said his grandfather passed, but he was a World War II. Awesome. Tell us about your grandfather. Any stuff that you can talk to your other family members about. Let us know about him and like what he did. That would be amazing. Yes, you can research Anne Frank. That's amazing. Kaya said that her grandpa met Anne Frank's father. That's incredible. I found some other links here that are letters from soldiers or letters from Holocaust victims. You can read those if you're interested. They're really, really interesting to read. Military technology, anything you want to research, I want you to research it. But then I want you to tell me about it. I want you to teach me about what you learned. So also looking around online or looking at, your house or I guess I don't think the libraries are open yet. But you can do ebooks online. You can find a book, video, interview, or talk to a relative. It sounds like quite a few of you have relatives that know a lot about this, that might have something interesting to share about their perspective. Explore what you find interesting about World War II and then let me know what you learn. So when you let me know what you learn, you can do a slide, an infographic, a letter, a research paper, a book review, a skit. They said draw with chalk on the sidewalk. That's fine. But I want you to find a creative way to show me what you've learned. Have a copy of Anne Frank's journal. Yep, that's here. The Diary of a Young Girl is the journal that she kept while they were hiding from the Nazis that you can read. Yes, you can do something about Nicholas Winton, Marita, absolutely. Or, like I said, there are a lot of other people that were around then that were helping rescue people out of Europe, absolutely. Willie said, can I make a mini story from the perspective of a kid who's saved? Yes, absolutely, Willie. I would love for you to do that. But the important stuff of this is the most important part of this, just like we say in class all the time, is you need to be learning something new. If you're doing your follow-up work and you're not having to research anything, if you're not learning something new, then you're not furthering your education. Find something that you're interested in and pursue it. Go after it. For me, I read a whole bunch of these letters from soldiers and letters from Holocaust victims the other day, and I learned a whole lot. Just even little things about people talking about what they did during their free time. Or who they were writing to, or what they were eating, or who they were spending time with there. It's so cool to read about that stuff. So there's some other links that I put in here to some different YouTube videos. This one here is a simple history video about different types of weapons that were used during World War II, particularly American soldiers. This one here is a hi-ho video that's a bunch of kids that get to meet a Holocaust survivor and ask him questions. It's an opportunity I really wish that we could experience if we were in school, but this is kind of interesting to watch, and people ask questions to an actual Holocaust survivor and get to hear, about their experience, which is pretty interesting. There's a video here that talks about kind of Hitler and how he came to power. There's a video here, it's actually a longer video, it's about 30 minutes, I think, that is a guy that's pretending to be a World War II medic. He's got the uniform on and all the materials and everything, and he talks about kind of the way that medics did their job during World War II, which is pretty cool. And there's another video here that's about rationing, which again, I think this is what I find most interesting. So I'm going to probably do some more research about rationing and learn more about that. Will Blanford said he had that book. I'm looking through for any other questions. The infographic, cool. Thank you for the lesson. You're welcome. Thank you, Kaya. Happy late birthday. Thank you so much. Maddie, if you have a question, go ahead. Yeah, anyone with questions, you can just type them in. We'll spend another minute or two in here. Can we do it about the medicine they had back then? Yes, absolutely, Marita. I think that'd be great. Just make sure you're looking at doctors in medicine during World War II. Absolutely, that would be great. Thank you, Veronica. I appreciate it. So again, I'll leave this up for another few minutes. I will put some music back on. I will be in the text chat for another minute or two. We're going to talk about Russian royalty. Probably not, Sam. We're going to talk a lot about Russia here in a few weeks when we talk about the Cold War. But we probably won't talk about Russian royalty. But yes, it is very complicated. So I'll put a little bit of music back on. I'll still be here in the chat if people have questions about the follow-up work. If not, I'm going to be over in Discord after that, and I will post a World War II Part 2 follow-up work thing in the stream as well. So thank you all very much. I appreciate your all's input. Let me know if you have any questions. You all the best. I miss you all every day. I can't wait to see you again. Bye. Maddie asked a really good question there, so I'm going to jump back in. Maddie said, why do we have to not forget about what happened with the memorials? So that's a really good question. You would think for something like that, like the Holocaust that happened, we would want to forget about it because of how horrible it is. If you think about you as an individual, if you do something, if something happens that's really bad, you want to try to forget it. But the problem is, if you completely forget about something that's bad, it increases the chance of it happening again. Think about, Maddie, has there ever been like a situation where you've done something and it accidentally hurt you, or it really scared you or something? Like if you climb way too high up in a tree and you get stuck there, that's pretty scary, right? So if you climb down out of that tree and then you completely forget about how dangerous it was to climb up in the tree, there's a chance you're going to do that again. You're going to climb back up to the top of the tree and get stuck again. So by remembering what happened last time, you can keep from doing it again. The same thing applies to history. By remembering things like the Holocaust, we remember what caused the Holocaust, which was the Nazi Party coming to power, which was a result of nationalism and racism. So by remembering about events like the Holocaust, we can remember what caused it to happen and prevent it from happening again. So if we see someone else or another group of people start trying to do the same thing, we can be like, hey, no, that's not allowed. don't do that. That's horrible. Stop. So it's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. I'm going to put the music back on now. But very good question, Maddie. Thank you.